Howdy SMITE fans, J-Mac here. Week 2 of the group stages took place this last weekend, and we had some quick sets, some unexpected sets, and even our first pentakill of the season. Only the top 3 teams from these group stages move on to the Phase 3 playoffs, while the bottom seed from each group has to wait to play until December. Well, let's take a look back and see what all happened in this week's episode of the SPL Weekly Recap. Now, our weekend started off with the Camelot Kings up against the Valhalla Valkyries. Game 1 was a slow burn from the Kings. The kill count low, but the farm game high. Netroid was left essentially unchecked all game and topped the charts to net the Game 1 for the Kings. Game 2, however, was a showcase of Johnny and Raffer's peak performances of the season. An absolute bloodbath of a game ends in Johnny with a pentakill, and the Valkyries take game number 2. Game number 3 was a story of the Kings' backliners far outshining that of the Valkyries. Netroid and BMT decimate the Valkyries in every team fight and push the set to a 2-1 lead. Game number 4's early game was solidified by Variety on the back of the solo lane Ratatosker. By the time the Valks made it to the mid-late game, the Kings were already far too up, and the Camelot Kings take the set 3-1. Well, set number 2 was the Tardis Titans up against the Oni Warriors. The Titans went back to their tried and true Morrigan Cthulhu composition in Game 1. The Warriors could not take down the might of the Cthulhus, and Layers picked them apart, stealing Game 1 for the Titans. Game 2, the Titans dared the Warriors to try and answer the comp again. And to the Warriors' credit, Benji did die a couple of times, but Paul had a pick of the litter on transformations, and between the double Dodges and the double Cthulhus, they shredded away the hopes of the Warriors in Game 2. Game number 3 was a much tighter race. The Warriors even managed to steal a late-game Fire Giant away from the Titans. But then they threw it away and squandered their chances with a few bad team fights right after. And one Fire Giant later, the Titans swept all 3 Phoenixes and the set 3-0. Saturday kicked off with the Tardis Titans up against the Solar Scarabs. Would you believe me if I told you that Paul got pentabanned in Game 1? Yeah, you could have fooled me. The backline of the Titans coasted through Game 1 against the Solar Scarabs thanks to their staunch front line. A near salty run back in Game number 2 went even worse for the Scarabs, as once more Cyclone Spin and Paul felt nearly untouchable because of their unfazed frontliners. Back to a more traditional comp of the Scarabs, and picking away some of the problems from the Titans in Game number 3, it starts off a little bit better for the Scarabs. They're able to hold momentum of the game, but at the Fire Giant, they stepped just a little too far forward, and the Titans punished them for it, snagging the objective, the deicide, and the set 3-0. Our second set of the day was the Jade Dragons facing off with the Camelot Kings. Game number 1 was a fairly even pace, up until a fight in the mid-left jungle corridor cost the Dragons 3 lives at the expense of just 1. And from there, the Kings swept away the neutral objectives, took out a couple of Phoenixes. In a last-ditch effort, the Dragons tried to force a fight at the Fire Giant, but they get erased by the Kings. The Kings start up with a 1-0. The Dragons in Game 2 decided to focus on shutting down Variety and Captain Twig. Heavy CC out of Sam and Mike locked the Kings down long enough for Hurry, Wind, and Final K to output enough damage to dominate the team fights and tie the set. Game 3, the Dragons held an early lead with Sam and Hurry, Wind, but an awkward pull around the Fire Giant turns into an elongated fight that the Dragons ended up losing. Even with a 4-man Typhoon out of Sam at the tail end of it all, the Dragons' damage output isn't enough to stop the Kings. The Dragons tried to go for a base race against the Kings, but Variety and his Titan hold firm, and they stop the Dragons in their place and sweep away Game 3. Game number 4, the Dragons pulled out some of their old reliables, but none of them mattered when it stacked up against the might of Captain Twig and the unkillable monster that was Big Man Tings. Kings closed out the set 3-1. Well, Sunday was our last day of the group stage, and our first set to start out that day was the Atlantis Leviathans and the Valhalla Valkyries. Game number 1 was back and forth all game long, with the Valks wiping Leviathans at the Fire Giant and grabbing the objective. But at the end of it all, it was a base race by both teams that ended with the Leviathans killing 4 and taking Game 1. Second game, we get to see what a chainsaw with infinite gas and a nearly unbreakable chain looked like. Panatom puts out 17 kills on Kali, and I think that's about all that I need to say about game number 2. Game 3, again, an early Valkyries lead, but this time the Leviathans waited just too long to try and stem the bleeding. Johnny and Emilito put out way too much damage on these double hunters for the Leviathans to handle, and the Valkyries take away game number 3. In game number 4, the Leviathans, they just had enough. They show no mercy in tearing apart the Valkyries, and they close out the set with a 3-1 victory and clinching their first seed with an undefeated group stage finish. Our final set of the weekend and of the group stage was the Olympus Bolts and the Oni Warriors. Game 1, the Bolts simply played the map better than the Warriors. The kill count was low, but the objective and map state was solid out of the Bolts, and they end up blanking the Warriors in the first game. Game number 2 was a dual lane focus out of the Bolts, and with a little help from Lasbra, the Bolts pulled out an early lead. A poor fight around the Fire Giant nearly wipes the Warriors, and the Bolts surge up the right lane after taking the objective and seal away game 2. Game number 3 can be summed up as Lasbra having no regard for enemy life as he W-keyed anyone who dared to walk near him. He finishes 8-0, and the Bolts finish the set with a 3-0 win. And there you have it. The group stages are all done, and the 6 teams to move on to the Phase 2 playoffs are as follows. From Group A, it's the Atlantis Leviathans, the Camelot Kings, and the Jade Dragons. And from Group B, it's the Tardis Titans, the Olympus Bolts, and the Solar Scarabs. We're going to take a week off from play, and then the playoffs will start up on November 19th at 11 a.m., so make sure that you're tuning in then. But if you do happen to miss out, I'll always have you covered on the SPL Weekly Recap.